Dear job seekers, it's 2026. And yes, robots can do almost everything now. You say you want to work from home. I say you don't even need to show up at all. You work at a snail's pace at double the cost, using quadruple the space, and then wonder why employers are rethinking the workforce. That's exactly why I created this podcast, not to scare you, but to prepare you. Like and subscribe to learn more.
And welcome to episode 1 of Working in Ontario. If you're listening to this while working from your couch, your kitchen table, or your childhood bedroom, congratulations. You are officially part of the modern workforce experiment.
An experiment that most people didn't volunteer for, but now feel entitled to continue.
That's the tension we're unpacking today. The history, the appeal, and the very real implications of working from home. Because remote work didn't just change where we work, it changed expectations, laws, risks, and power dynamics. Working from home might feel like a perk, but there's a lot beneath the surface that most people don't consider. Let's start by looking at how remote work evolved.
Before 2020, working from home was rare. It was something you negotiated quietly, often after years of proving yourself. It was framed as flexibility, not entitlement. You worked from home because your employer trusted you, not because you demanded it.
And let's be honest, many employers believed that if they couldn't see you, you weren't working. Remote workers were often viewed with suspicion. Productivity was tied to physical presence. Office culture depended on visibility.
Then the pandemic forced everyone's hand. Entire organizations went remote overnight, policies were written on the fly, equipment was borrowed, boundaries disappeared.
And something unexpected happened. Work didn't stop. In many cases, it accelerated. Meetings multiplied, emails increased, and employees became constantly reachable.
That moment shattered a long-held belief that work must happen in a specific place. And once that belief was gone, it was never coming back the same way.
By 2022, working from home was no longer a perk. It became normalized. By 2024, many job seekers treated it as a baseline requirement. And by 2026, some workers are genuinely shocked when an employer says no.
We need to acknowledge why working from home is so appealing, because the appeal is real. Fewer commutes mean more time. Flexibility means autonomy. Working from home feels like reclaiming part of your life.
For parents, caregivers, people with disabilities, or those priced out of major cities, remote work can feel like liberation. It opens doors that were previously closed.
But appeal does not equal entitlement, and convenience does not cancel responsibility. Employers did not suddenly stop caring about productivity, security, or liability just because Zoom exists.
And this is where expectations started to diverge. Employees saw freedom, employers saw risk. That gap is where most workplace conflict now lives. Let's talk law, because this is where myths thrive. In Ontario, the Employment Standards Act, the ESA, still applies regardless of where you work.
Working from home does not change your basic employment rights. Minimum wage, hours of work, overtime, vacation pay, public holidays, termination notice, all of it still applies.
But here's the key point people miss. The Act does not give you a right to work remotely. It regulates employment conditions, not work location.
So if an employer decides remote work no longer fits their business model, the law does not force them to continue it, unless it is tied to accommodation obligations or contractual terms.
Before we answer a few listener questions, there's something crucial we have to unpack: the experience of remote work for people with physical disabilities, and how Ontario's current laws view requests for remote work as a form of accommodation. Many listeners might assume that remote work is simply a convenience. But for some workers with physical disabilities, it's not a perk, it's an accessibility need. Think about someone who uses specialized medical equipment that's permanently installed at home, someone who needs controlled environments for chronic pain, or someone whose disability makes commuting physically exhausting or unsafe. For these workers, being in an office isn't just inconvenient, it can be a real barrier to participation.
And this is where Ontario's accessibility framework comes into play. The Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, often called AODA, was designed to remove barriers that people with disabilities face, including in employment. The integrated accessibility standards under AODA require employers to notify employees and prospective employees that accommodations are available and to consult with them to provide suitable accommodations when requested. Here's the key thing people need to understand. Remote work itself is not automatically guaranteed by AODA. But if a person's disability makes traditional in-office work inaccessible, they can absolutely request an accommodation, which can include remote work, and employers are required to consider that request seriously. This duty comes not just from AODA, but also from the Ontario Human Rights Code, which mandates accommodation up to the point of undue hardship.
What this means in practice is that if an employee with a physical disability explains how their condition affects their ability to perform essential job functions in the office, they can ask for changes that help them do their job effectively. In many cases, working from home, where they control accessibility, furniture, medical equipment, lighting, and environment, is one of the most effective accommodations. And employers are expected to talk through those needs with the employee and consider reasonable solutions that reduce barriers. But it's not automatic. The employer and employee must have a conversation, a collaborative process, about what the accommodation looks like. Sometimes that is full-time remote work. Sometimes it's hybrid work. Sometimes it's modified duties, flexible hours, or adjusted break times. The law doesn't prescribe a one-size-fits-all answer, but it does require consultation and meaningful consideration.
And in 2025 and 2026, what's changed is that employers have become more aware that accommodation obligations extend into the remote realm. It used to be easier for an employer to simply say, "We don't offer remote work," and leave it at that. Now, with accessibility laws being enforced, and with increased scrutiny on accessibility compliance, employers are more often obligated to demonstrate that they considered accommodation requests in good faith and explored alternatives. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to approve every request, but they can't dismiss them without reason.
And we should also be clear. Disclosing a disability is a personal choice, but if an employee wants accommodation, they typically have to let the employer know that they experience limitations related to a disability and how those limitations affect their ability to work. The employer can then ask for appropriate information to understand the needs, and together they work toward a plan. Under the law, this process must respect confidentiality and dignity.
But as with everything in employment law, real-world experiences vary. Some workers tell us that getting accommodations approved, especially remote work, can be slow or feel like a battle. Others find that employers are pushing back against remote work generally, even when it's the accommodation that makes the work possible. That tension is part of the new era of work we keep talking about.
Now let's move into health and safety, because people love to assume their employer is responsible for everything that happens at the workplace, even if that workplace is our home.
Under Ontario's Occupational Health and Safety Act, employers still have a duty to take reasonable precautions for worker safety. That includes remote workers.
But reasonable does not mean unlimited. Employers can provide guidance on ergonomics, safe workstation setup, and best practices. They cannot control your entire home environment.
If you're working at a kitchen chair with no back support for 12 hours a day, that is not automatically your employer's liability.
I work fully remote, and I'm wondering, if my employer never inspected my home office, are they still responsible if I get injured?
That's a great question, and the answer sits in a gray zone.
Employers are expected to assess risk, but remote work relies heavily on self-reporting. If you did not follow guidelines or misrepresented your setup, liability becomes complicated very quickly.
Which brings us to the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, WSIB. Many people assume that if they are injured at home during work hours, coverage is automatic.
It is not. WSIB looks at whether the injury happened in the course of employment. That means the activity matters, the timing matters, and the workspace matters.
If you slipped while grabbing coffee during a break, that may not be covered. If you were injured performing a work task in a designated workspace, it might be.
Remote work increases disputes, not clarity. Documentation becomes everything.
Now let's talk about something employers are far more concerned about than your comfort: data.
Remote work creates security risks that didn't exist when data lived behind office firewalls. Home Wi-Fi networks, shared devices, unsecured cloud storage, all vulnerabilities.
This is especially critical for government contractors, regulated industries, and organizations handling sensitive information.
And this is where cross-border remote work becomes a serious issue. Working remotely from outside Canada introduces foreign laws, surveillance risks, and data sovereignty problems.
I'm a Canadian employee, but I want to work remotely while living abroad. Why does my employer care if I'm still doing my job?
Because your physical location determines which laws can access your data.
And in some cases, simply logging in from another country can expose sensitive systems to foreign jurisdictions, even if you never notice.
Organizations tied to national security, defense, or critical infrastructure are particularly strict about remote work locations.
The general stance is simple. If data leaves the country, control weakens. Trust in the employee does not override risk in the system.
Remote workers also have privacy obligations. Confidential information does not stop being confidential because you're at home.
Screens visible to family members, shared computers, unsecured files, all of these can create breaches without malicious intent.
And intent doesn't matter much when the damage is done.
There's also a risk most workers don't want to talk about: replaceability.
Remote work makes it easier to outsource, automate, or eliminate roles entirely. When work is location independent, workers become globally comparable.
Visibility decreases, loyalty weakens, monitoring increases, and job security can quietly erode.
Finally, we need to address scams. Work-from-home opportunities attract fraud because desperation meets hope.
Fake recruiters, upfront fees, unpaid trial work, misclassified contracts, these are everywhere.
What's the biggest red flag when it comes to remote job offers?
Speed. If they rush you, avoid contracts, or refuse to explain payroll, walk away.
Real employers don't hide.
Working from home isn't disappearing, but neither are the risks, responsibilities, or consequences.
Remote work was once a privilege. Now it's a pressure point in the labor market.
If you want to survive the future of work, you need to understand the full picture, not just the perks.
That's why this podcast exists, not to scare you, but to prepare you. Like, subscribe, and tune in next week for more episodes on working in Ontario.